Episode 88, Casting 495, Celebrities Worldwide. This is a mobile podcast at times, and I am one Sir Grove, OSGOE. What's going on, everyone? How's everyone doing wherever you are in the world, this world of ours? I hope that you're having a good time and that you're content and that you're enjoying yourself. I hope that all is well with you and that you are you're having a pleasant time. So the episode of this podcast is how sometimes things are illusory and how back in the 1980s, going into the 90s, we were at war. So what exactly do I mean by that? We were at war. First of all, who's we? Well, we as a society, we always have somewhere in the world some kind of skirmish, some kind of conflict. Now, this is military intelligence, civilian intelligence history. And so I'm speaking from a standpoint of someone who is an active defense contractor, civilian defense contractor, who has also a knowledge of some degree of world history, U.S. history, American history, and comes from a family that is largely military and was raised on military bases and on and off bases quite frequently, regularly. And then as an adult, myself have worked at different government agencies, installations, bases, etc. So I have some knowledge. I have some knowledge of the gov and the military and the intelligence community, since I am a member of the U.S. intelligence community, having carried out successful operations and having been paid for my services, unbeknownst to a lot of folk who are highly misinformed and who think that I'm just some crazy delusional rapper with stories of grandeur. Well, yeah, that's entertainment, people. But in reality, not only is it entertainment, but in the real world, I'm a government defense contractor. For those who didn't know, you don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe me. Yeah. So I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you want to believe some other story in your head, some other narrative, that's perfectly okay with you. I won't try to change your mind, man. Believe whatever you want. So I'm a government contractor, which a lot of people actually do know. And during the 1980s and 90s, before I was became a government contractor, coming up on about 1995 ish, when I started the process, when I entered into the arena of said process, when I underwent the process of becoming a contractor, I had to start an entity first. In other words, I had to become my own boss. I had to create a company back then, fresh out of high school, because I knew with foresight that there needed to be an entity with which to interact with the gov. So I did that, started that, beginning, believe it or not, back in 1995. Again, with the knowledge that it would grow and expand, and that it would be a process over the years and decades. So I did that unbeknownst to people who I grew up with. Some of them knew, but mostly didn't. They knew that I was artistic and that I was had been an athlete and that I was creative and imaginative, and that I had skills, and they knew that I had technical knowledge and technical know-how, and they knew that I did well in school, and that whenever I wanted to get straight A's that I would, and that I had, and that I was an honor roll student, and that I goofed around, and that I was a fucking class clown. But they knew that I had been in programs, for whiz kids and shit. And, so they were like, hey, dude, come and be in the gang. And I was like, okay. So did the gang shit too. And, crazy antics and high stakes shit. And, some Ocean's 11 type shit. So we did that, and that was interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about that. That's when a lot of kids like me who had been in whiz kid programs, they saw, like I did, that despite all all reports coming from local communities, that neighborhood watch groups, watchdog agencies, watchdog organizations, people, folks who were on the lookout for gangs and gang activity encroaching in their neighborhoods, to try to curb and put a stop to that. People like me, people like myself, we knew, dude, that the gangs were just so innumerable, because the statistics were sketchy, dude. It was like, the fucking internet didn't even exist. So if the internet didn't exist, how were these people coming up with their numbers, man? And we had a numbers guy from our neighborhood. We had someone who later became a PhD, and he was part of the fraternity, along with all of us, man, with our fraternal order. Because you see, we actually had what is, by all definition, a secret fraternal order. And so, knowing what we know about organizations and different groups, we formed a secret fraternal organization of our own. And, various ages, but young adults. So we were young adults, and it wasn't just young men; it was young women, young adults, young adult women. And when we did that, we would have meetings and we would talk. The other thing you ought to know is that not only would we have board meetings and convene as a committee and as a group, since we were smart kids, we often met at the public library and different libraries in meeting rooms. Because you see, we watched civic leaders do that. And we had read Robert's Rules of Order, parliamentary procedures. And we understood those systems. And so we would convey information to each other when we would meet up about the goings on of, or from our observations of the goings on of the community. And we also were members ourselves of different organizations, like official members. Like we were invited to and participated in different community organizations. We joined the historic Riverside Neighborhood Committee. We actually became part of that, and we would go and sit in on meetings. We would go to meetings where leaders in the community would talk about gang activity, and we were in gangs. We would show up and say, we're with this gang and we're here to listen to what y'all have to say. There were secret meetings that we were let in on. I met a former gang member from Chicago who had started an organization that he got funded. He was a grown man with a family. He had been a boxer. and his name is Ron Carr, actually. And Ron Carr and I met at an event, and he was like, hey, you have knowledge of this community, as I understand. I'd like to invite you and your crew to come down and chill. In other words, come in and see how I run my organization and what we do. So we did. And we sat down and he showed us information, literature, and his offices, and explained to us how he had grown up in a gang, and that at some point he left it and he was boxing, and that he got married, man, and had a kid, and it had been like decades, and that he had an organization. So he would bring Bloods and Crips and GDs and Vice Lords, and in other words, Gangster Disciples and Vice Lords. He's from Chicago, okay? So he comes from the part of the country where Gangster Disciples and Vice Lords started, like with David Dolly and Barksdale, and Black Disciples, and Gangster Disciples, and Supreme Gangsters, and the El Rookins, and the whole Midwest movement, right? He came from that. So at some point he would just ask questions like, hey, why are we fighting each other? In other words, ask the gangs, like, why are we designed to commit genocide? Like, why are we set up in such a way that we're killing each other? Like, how is that the design? Is it us as a people? Did we say, okay, this is what we're gonna do? Or was it by design of the system? And I'm not saying the white man or the black man or this man or that woman. What I'm saying is he would ask legitimate questions. He would pose questions such as, fundamental, like questioning fundamental reality. Like, are these gangs? Are these militias that have been told that they're gangs in the event that America needs folks on the streets armed up? Like, and so they're led to believe that they're gangs, but that they could quickly be militarized if something popped off. I mean, have you ever thought about that yourself? America is armed. We're armed with every kind of weapon that there is. And these gangs on the streets of America, if you recall, when ISIS was on the rise, there were gangs that were like, yo, if something pops off with ISIS, man, we're ready to ride on ISIS. Now think about that for a moment. Ron Carr was talking about that back in the day. Like, I was talking about that back in the day. So he would bring gangs together to talk, to communicate, gang leaders, gang members, people who wanted to have conversation, who wanted to have dialogue, and wanted to discuss what goes on in their communities. Sometimes there would be secret meetings. Now keep in mind, his organization was anti terrorism, essentially. It was basically domestic terrorism. And what I mean by that, as it's my opinion, that's what he was doing, was, though it didn't explicitly state, hey, this is an anti-terroristic organization, anti-terrorism organization. I mean, it really was, man. Because when cats are like in their neighborhoods, man, just blasting on each other day in, day out, that's pretty much urban warfare, man. That's pretty much fucking terrorism. You can say that it's not terrorism. I say that it is. It's domestic fucking terrorism, man. And so he would rightly communicate with law enforcement and talk to them about what they knew about what was going on in the community. And there would be an exchange of information. There'd be dialogue. In fact, he was funded by the city and different organizations to collect intelligence information because people want to know what's going on in their communities. So some people, they view it differently. They're like, that whole business, man, like you shouldn't be like gathering intel and like communicating with the gov, like what you trying to do kind of thing, right? And it's like, man, grow the fuck up, dude. You ain't gonna have a gang in my neighborhood that overruns my neighborhood, period. That you ain't gonna overrun our city with your gangs, okay? Maybe in some city they let you do that, but you wasn't coming to where I come from, and you wasn't fitting to do that. And in fact, we made sure that didn't happen where I come from. Because in advance, like I said, we started a fraternity. We started a fraternal organization, an official fraternal organization. And we were already from the Northwest, so we already had training in different areas. First of all, we had training at we were skilled. We were skilled in what we do. And I mean, just straight up, man, I'm gonna tell you, like, when I was in high school, some of my friends, man, they decided to join the military. Some of my, I have a buddy, man, from childhood. He flies helicopters. And I mean, he's the one that commandeers. He's a pilot, and he flies fucking helicopters out here in New York. And he does that for the U.S. military, i.e. he's in the U.S. military, okay? It's a buddy of mine. He grew up in one of the neighborhoods that we were in. And I have other friends who joined the military. I have friends who became police officers, man, who I used to play sports with. And, they're cops, man. And that's what they wanted to do in life. They wanted to help people, man, and not be bad cops. They wanted to be good cops, man. And so, if you think that because somebody's gathering intel in their neighborhood and they're trying to figure out who's who and what's what and what's going on, right? I would say that person's probably just being vigilant, in this day and age. That's called counterterrorism a lot of times. So Ron Carr was doing that, man. And in my opinion, what he was doing was counterterrorism, man, in its early stages of, what would lead up to 9/11. And I liked his style, man, and I liked how he ran his program. So he asked me if I wanted to become a gang interventionist. Now, keep in mind, I was gang active at the time, right? And he was working with someone who played sports from the University of Washington, someone who had been a Washington State Huskies player. And so Ron Carr had recruited a former Huskies player. And I knew that person because he had gone to my high school. He had gone to my high school and he had been older than me by a couple of years. I knew his brother. They both played football and they both went to our high school and we partied with them. So like later after the parties and whatnot, and after the dude I'm referring to, the gentleman who had been at the University of Washington and a Washington State Huskies football player, he came back to EVT, that is Everett. He came back to the EVT and he started to help the youth, man. He started to mentor the youth, having been a Huskies player. And because, he had his trials and tribulations that he was open about, that he would talk about with the youth, and he would mentor the youth. So he ended up part of the organization with Ron Carr, and then he ended up getting involved with other organizations in addition to his work that he did with Ron Carr. By the way, they were in the newspaper together, like out in the streets, like just talking to people in the community, man, doing good work, man, doing great work for society. And so I had been with Ron Carr and the other individual, the other gentleman. And we put together events to try to quell the violence in the neighborhoods and the gang warfare and stuff like that. And we had an event. We had an event downtown at the old historic theater, and there were a lot of cool, fun, neat things that we did there with that. We had arcade games that were brought in for the kids, like food that they could buy. You know what I'm saying? We had the stage, and it was the city went all out for that, man. They put money into that, and they paid us to come and rock the mic, and we had the DJ, and we had the MCs, and different gangs met up, man. And there were a lot of police officers there that night. You know, there was quite a presence of uniformed officers in the event that something popped off between the different gang sets. So that was back in the early 1990s, because I was still in high school at that time, and I was in high school in the early 1990s. I enrolled in high school, entered high school from 1989, going into high school at that time. so this was like, man, I was still in high school. And thing about it, in addition to everything that's just been shared with you, is that when gangs started to overrun the community, keep in mind, while we were in high school, we formed a fraternal organization because we knew in advance that it was going to happen in our neighborhoods. And the way we knew, before we ever, like go back in time, right? Okay, before we ever met Ron Carr, before I was ever in high school, we were in junior high school, and we had this very highly intelligent math teacher who, he was also the football coach. Funny dude, smart man. And he, like, at some point in our high school, or I'm sorry, in junior high school, I'm saying junior high school, middle school, which was separated by just a few blocks from the high school, there was a rule at the junior high school when I was in junior high school that you couldn't leave campus during lunchtime. Well, nearby, like, in other words, like right off the campus, like you're on the playing field, and then you okay, so you're on the playing field, man, and you can see fucking Burger King, is what I'm saying. You're on the playing field for recess, and you can see the donut shop. You can see the grocery store that's literally like 100 feet away, that has all the candy and the soda and the chips and this and that. It's right there. It's Broadway. So, you know, the only thing that separates the playing field at the time and all these restaurants and stuff, these fast food places that, you know, attract and appeal to kids our age back then, is a fence line. And it wasn't locked. You just walk off campus, but you weren't supposed to. So our teacher, the math teacher, who was also the football coach, as I said, I played football there in junior high school, and he was my coach. He was also my math instructor. He would watch for kids. Like, he would sit out on the field, and he'd have binoculars, and he'd look for anyone going off campus. He was a built up man. Like, he was husky. Like, he was built up. Like, he had a large frame, right? But boy, could he run, man. Boy, could he run. And man, if you saw him with binoculars, and he saw you, and you were trying to leave that campus, man, and he spotted you, man, he would come hauling ass across that field from the entirely other side, because there were a couple different entrances. You know, it's a square, right? So someone might run one way, someone might run the other way, and try to trick him, right? Man, he come after you, man, and you get pink slipped. You get pink slipped, right? So then that means, like, if there was a dance or something, or some kind of event like a field day, like, you couldn't attend it. Like, you'd be in trouble, and you'd also have to go to detention. So, but the reason I say this to you is that later they changed that policy where you can, and by the way, I was at North Stars, so I was a star, and that was, yeah, man, that was fucking North Star shit. And, fucking but on a real dark note, though, that's when the gang shit, believe it or not, started popping off. Like, gangs were always on the West Coast. Is, if you're smart, I mean, you know, if you just use common sense, you know that. But back then, where we were, like, heavy gang activity, like LA, Los Angeles, and California as a whole, based gangs and Midwest gangs, they were on their way. And so, as it played out, later the school knew that it couldn't continue to control the kids at lunchtime, because everyone was going off fucking campus anyway. And there was a whole thing where you increasingly so would go off campus like, yeah, he's going to try to run after us, man, but we just going to go like 10 at a time. And there at the donut shop, later, they had this thing, man, for like I know it doesn't even sound legit, but you could get, well, I guess, okay, so some stores will do this like after a certain time. Fuck you, man. After a certain fucking time, you could like leave the campus and, hold up, man, this motherfucker, man, he's got me. Man, this dude should have gone in traffic, man, and he's just sitting here blocking fucking traffic. So what I meant to say was, man, some places, man, when a store's about to close, you can buy a dozen donuts. And after a certain fucking goddamn it, man, after a certain fucking time of day, okay, like at nighttime, right? You can get a dozen donuts like dirt cheap. Well, back then, these were gourmet donuts, and you could get a dozen of them for $5 at this bakery. Like, that's highly unusual in this day, in this day and age, to be able to find a bakery that makes fucking, donuts, like Krispy Kreme type donuts, but this was even better than Krispy fucking Kreme. That made these like jumbo, like right there in front of your face would make these donuts. You could get a dozen of these donuts. I believe it was a Korean American owned donut shop. You could get a dozen of them for $5 on Friday. So you're probably like, who fucking cares? Like, why is that significant? Because it was then allowed. It was then at some point it was allowed for students. In other words, students were allowed to go and get a dozen donuts or however many fucking donuts they wanted from the donut shop, and then bring the donuts to school on Friday, and you could eat donuts in the classroom. Because before there was a rule, like you couldn't eat in the classroom. They switched all that shit up, man. Parents and stuff were like, hey, my son or daughter might need a little snack, We're going to lobby government and like legislate against these rules where kids can't eat in the classroom. Like there's kids that are like hypoglycemic and shit, and they need a little snack, man. And so they actually had it at some point, like you could bring a pizza to school. Like you could go to, just like they had the donuts, well, there was also a pizza place, man, where you could go and get pizza, and you could bring that to school too. So, kids would bring fucking a pizza to school and be chilling in the classroom with a dozen donuts and a fucking pizza on their desk. That shit was dope, man. That shit was live. Like that's when things started to change. But here's the contrast. Here's the dichotomy of that. Here's how it becomes dichotomous. So, yeah, fun, neat, days of innocence, so remarkable were those times. But then the flip side of the coin is that there was this informational data pamphlet that was circulating from local law enforcement to the schools and the school district and different teachers and different counselors and different individuals in the community that notified those individuals of the looming gang scenario where gangs were migrating, the migratory pattern of gangs coming from not just California to the Northwest part of the United States, but from the Midwest and from New York, because the world was changing and travel was more accessible to folks who, may have not had the means before. And like the price of like vehicles becoming more and more, less expensive and more and more people on the roads and more people in the skies and all this kind of stuff, right? So, trains, buses, and so the local law enforcement, state law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and different agencies were circulating these informational packets and sharing intelligence with the community about these gangs and who the gang and what gangs and how many of the gangs and how to identify them by their colors and the way that they wear their clothing, like their ball caps, their their pants, and how this would be to the left or this would be to the right, or this one would wear beads of this color or beads of this color, or bandanas, this color and that color, and how they would stand and how they would, position themselves on a street corner or up against a wall and sell drugs and methodology and techniques and patterns and all this kind of stuff, right? They actually had that shit. And so after the teachers and counselors and instructors and principals and vice principals and staff and faculty of different schools were clued in and briefed on this phenomenon of gangs coming to the Pacific Northwest, right? That's when the various institutions and individuals there summarized those goings on, those reports for students, and they let us in on it. They disseminated the information to us and said to us, okay, listen, we need to let everyone know that we have been meeting as teachers and staff and faculty, and there is this situation where it's believed by the government that gangs are going to start showing up in our communities this summer. Okay, so that's what they were telling us, literally, just as I shared with you just now in this podcast. That's what we were told when we were in fucking junior high school. And he was both my 7th grade and 8th grade math teacher. And he's the one who informed us, who apprised us. And my cousin Rizzo and I were in that class, as was DJ Slow-Mo, believe it or not. So DJ Slow-Mo and I believe our brethren, our friend who flies helicopters out here, he was in that class. Or had been in one of the years, 7th or 8th or both, right? Grade. And so we found out in junior high school that gangs were on their way. And I'll explain very clearly and point out when exactly that was. It's when the movie Colors was released to the public, when the movie Colors was made. And I'm talking about Colors, the movie where on the soundtrack there was the song, the title track, Colors by Ice-T, the rapper Ice-T. Now you may laugh and you may say to yourself, haha, that movie's funny and wow, that's so campy, like, oh, the movie Colors, wow, wacky, like that was back in the day, right? Well, the thing about that was that back in the day, man, it wasn't fucking funny, because where that movie was playing in theaters, gangs were having shootouts and shit. When that movie fucking came out, man, the movie Colors, like, laugh as you might at what it looks like in the context of now. Back then, dude, when that movie was fucking released, when that movie came out in theaters, dude, there were shootouts at theaters, man. There were like motherfuckers getting blasted on and shit, like blasting on fools and shit, like homicide, like at fucking like the Colors opening like debut, like in different cities in America, because it was about gang shit, man. It was about gang culture. And so gangs were going to the theaters to see it. Every fucking gang in America was going to see that movie, man. And honestly, man, it wasn't funny. That was crazy dark shit. So imagine you're in junior high school, right? And you have a teacher who tells you, like, on some Red Dawn, the movie type shit, right? Plus that movie was out back then as well, like around the 80s and shit, right? So imagine you had seen that movie in the fucking 1980s. And then not only had you seen the movie Red Dawn in the 1980s and it scared the shit out of you, because, man, if you were a fucking kid in the 1980s, dude, if you were a kid in the 1980s and you saw the movie Red Dawn when you were, like, say, 9 years old, dude, don't tell me you wouldn't be fucking scared. That movie, I'm not talking about the fake-ass movie that they made a few years ago. That shit was stupid. And listen, man, I have no apologies about that. The Red Dawn that came out a few years ago, that shit was dumb. It was dumb, and I'm going to tell you why it was dumb. Man, okay, that movie was supposed to take place, and I think it's supposed to be centered in the Pacific Northwest. Dude, there's no military in the movie. It's like, where the fuck is the military? Throughout the whole movie, you're like, and this is a spoiler alert, that movie was stupid, man. It's like, I don't even know how they got the rights to make the movie to, like, revamp Red Dawn. That's not the movie Red Dawn. That was not the motherfucking movie Red Dawn, dude, that came out, the original Red Dawn. The original Red Dawn is a fucking chilling movie, dude. That movie is no joke, okay? So if you're looking at the internet and you're trying to figure out what I'm talking about because you don't know, if you see a movie that was made after the year 2000 called Red Dawn, that's one of the stupidest fucking movies in the whole universe, okay? Because the Red Dawn that came out in the 1980s, that's one of the fucking most chilling movies ever fucking made back in the 1980s, okay? That shit was a real movie, dude. I mean, man, if you haven't seen the movie Red Dawn that came out in the early 2000s, look, man, I'm not going to tell you to see it or not. I fucking hated it, and it was stupid. And if you knew anything about the first Red Dawn, you would know why the fucking revamp of it has nothing to do with the actual fucking movie, dude, that came out. It should do the Red Dawn that was made in the night that was made within the past 10 years or whatever it was, dude. The one that you can find on Wikipedia, man, that shit, man, should have never been made. That should have never been made, dude. It's so flawed. It's filled and fraught with so many things that don't even make any sense. Because, okay, so America gets attacked, right, in the original Red Dawn movie. Well, you see how people like take the action in that movie, right? But in the second movie, there's no fucking military. It's like, come on, dude, seriously, dude. Okay, North Korea does a sneak attack on America in which is the premise of Red Dawn Part 2, right? Or, I'm sorry, not Red Dawn Part 2, because there is, as far as I know, there isn't a Part 2. I'm talking about in the revamp when these clowns tried to fucking make Red Dawn again. Okay, the story in the second incarnation of Red Dawn is that America's attacked by North Korea on some sneak attack shit, right? Okay. Well, where's the U.S. military in the movie? There's not a single, like, U.S. military, like, you know, officer or, like, a tank or a U.S. jet. Like, it's so fucking stupid, dude, throughout the whole movie. I'm like, okay, well, where's the U.S. response? Where is an aircraft in the sky that's, like, U.S. military? Where is, like, a battalion of trucks or a convoy of trucks and troops and shit like this, right? Where's the U.S. military? It's not in the movie Red Dawn, the second one that was made, and that's why it's fucking dumb and it makes absolutely no sense. The first Red Dawn, saw that as a kid like I did, you would have been scared out of your fucking mind when that shit hit the theaters, and then after that, some years down the road, the movie Colors came out. So, the point in all of this is this. You're a 9-year-old fucking kid, right? You see the movie Red Dawn, you see the movie Colors, and then your teachers tell you, hey man, basically your neighborhood's about to be attacked by gangs. Gangs are coming, dude, and they're going to attack your neighborhood, and they're going to attack the community. That's what we were told when we were in junior high school. So, you know, you can say whatever the fuck you want, man, and you can pretend like you wouldn't give a shit. But, man, if you know, came from where I come from and were where I was, and you grew up in an otherwise, like, orderly community where things are very orderly and things are very well terraced and very well structured, and, you know, you grew up in a time of innocence, like playing arcade games and roller skating and fucking going to the roller rink and, you know, wild waves and shit, man, and playing video games with your buddies at home and stuff on, like, Nintendo, and, like, having slumber parties with the fellas and, you know, watching movies and going to the movie theaters and stuff, and doing everything that kids do that I could go on and on about, like anything that, like, if you have kids, whatever you've taken your kids to do, like go to Chuck E. Cheese pizza and, you know, just go shop at the mall and buy some new clothes for, like, the school year, and, you know, have your lunch pail with your favorite little foods and stuff in it, man, and, you know, play your sports like your flag football and your softball, and, you know, do this with the Cub Scouts, and, you know, have your fun parties and birthday parties and stuff, and then someone's like, man, your neighborhood's about to be attacked. Your neighborhood's about to be under attack. And you're fucking 9 years old, dude. If you tell me you wouldn't be scared at 9 years old when someone told you that, you're a fucking liar, dude. You're a fucking liar. And you know you would be fucking scared at 9 years old if some adult said your neighborhood's about to be attacked by gangs, and you're like, what do you mean? Yeah, this is what they look like. They carry Uzis. They have fucking AK-47s. They sell drugs to kids and fucking they poison kids and shit. They fucking take over your community and they make people sick with their toxic fucking drugs, and they get people hooked on these pills and these needles and these drugs and narcotics and cocaine and everything you could think of. Like, they make money and they like make everybody in the neighborhood sick, and they like do this and they do that. Okay, and you're 9 years old, right? And they're like, yeah, and they're coming to your neighborhood and they're going to attack your neighborhood. Okay, there's drive-by shootings with little kids that get shot in crossfire and the ricochet, right? And you're a 9-year-old kid and they're telling you that. That's what they told us, man. And that's why we formed 495. That's why we formed 495. That's why we formed 495, okay? Before the gangs came. And they were absolutely fucking accurate in terms of the intel that the federal government had disseminated to the state and then to the cities, municipalities, and the different counties and the different townships. They were absolutely spot on with regard to the time estimate in terms of when the gangs would arrive. So that's how we formed 495. We formed a fraternity knowing, excuse me, that shit was inevitable and that it would happen. And we wanted to be prepared for it, man. When gangs hit the city, man, back when I was a kid, man, that shit was fucking insane. It was surreal in ways that I've already described in previous podcasts. It's all the data are already there. I mean, I've already explained it in the other podcasts, man, about what took place and how shit went down. And we just knew, man, that we had to be in the gang shit. Because if we didn't, I mean, come on, man. Like, anybody from my fucking high school who claims, okay, like, you're probably thinking to yourself, nah, man, Grove, you didn't actually have to be in a gang. I'm going to explain something to you, man, that you might not know about the West Coast. You're probably saying to yourself, not everybody in a high school's in a gang. Like, some people make decisions and they don't join gangs. Look at the preps and look at the jocks. Like, they're the ones that are like social, they're sociable. They're the ones that aren't antisocial, right? They're the ones that are social. And they're the ones that aren't disestablishment because they're not the anti-social disestablishment types, right? They're the social, like, upper crust of society, right? They're the upper class. They're the preps. They're the jocks, the athletes, right? America throws money at athletes. Like, if you're an athlete in America, a lot of times you get a slap on the wrist. If you're a prep, a jock, that means that your dad's like, runs the city and is like, owns the commerce downtown and is this and that and the head of these companies and, all this stuff, right? Yada, 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 right? Yada, 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 right? Dude, at my fucking high school, 99% of motherfuckers had some shit to do with gangs. And here's how. Gangs plagued our community, man. Those preps and jocks that I just told you about, they were in gangs. They joined fucking gangs. You're probably thinking, no way, Grove. Like, come on, man. Yeah, well, then you don't fucking know the history of the United States West Coast. You're highly misinformed. They became part of the shit. Now, you're probably like, how did they join? Like, were they active in the streets with, like, guns and bandanas and shit? No, but they were into drugs, and they made money selling drugs, and they fucking wore bandanas, and they were connected to niggas that were in real gangs, because gangs will come and turn out towns, man, and they'll be like, hey, You want to do some powder cocaine? I got it. And if you and your friends want to fucking do it, like I've got it all night long, right? And so that entices people who come from upper class, who have from the upper class, and who have the money to buy the drugs, right? I mean, cocaine is a rich man's drug. Like if you live in a neighborhood, man, and you're from the projects, man, it's hard for you to buy fucking cocaine, man, because you ain't got the money. But I'm gonna tell you like this, since I'm a half white, half Caucasian kid, I can tell you like this. I lived in the upper class. I was in the upper class community. My uncle wasn't his upper class. So I had friends who sadly, they got turned on to drugs. And it was very sad, man. People who I used to play sports with, man, who were athletes and who went places like and did big things. I know people who have won bowls in football. I know people who have played professional sports. I was a bodyguard, man, for a minute and rolled with the dude. I won't go into details, but I know people, man, who have played sports professionally, semi-professionally, and man, I'm gonna say like this, man. It's very sad to see, kids who you grew up with and people who you meet and who through sports, and you just want, you wish the best of them and you hope for the best for them because you know how talented they are, and then come to find out, man, down the road that they're hooked on a drug like cocaine, like heroin, like opioids, or Oxycontins, or whatever fucking drug you can think of, right? Because I've seen all that shit, man. I've been around all that shit. And then what's even more fucked up, man, is the contradiction of it all is because, man, you might be selling some weed, a little powder cocaine or something. And then it's like, you don't want to sell to someone like that. You don't want to sell to someone like that, but you might end up doing that. And then you're just like, man, this isn't good, man, because we were friends and we grew up and now I'm selling you drugs, man. And you played sports, and it's like, when a whole neighborhood is based out like that, when a whole community's rocked out, when a whole community's smoked out, when the houses that used to be fucking nice and orderly and everything was just well structured and everything was pretty and gorgeous and cute and picturesque and postcard, and it was like a little like fantasy like town community where everything was magic and everything was majestic, and you went and saw E.T., and you fucking went to Burger King and you were doing what kids do and going to Chuck E. Cheese and having pizza parties and going to the roller rink and going to the mall and, getting your clothes for the new school year. And then all of a sudden, man, your homeboys are smoked out on drugs. And those homes that you lived in, they're drug homes where people are selling and buying and trap housing. And it's a trap house now. And mom and dad are divorced and they split up. And man, they live in separate places in apartments or something. And because maybe they had a little bit of money, right? And so they're in different states and you end up with that house, okay? Or somehow you end up with the house because maybe sadly your parents passed or whatever. And then you got to make a move because you ain't got money because something happened, like a brother took the money or sister or sibling in some kind of probate, like switch move because they got the will or something and you didn't and you got shafted, right? But you get the house and they get everything else, like the money, and now you ain't got a job and no one's gonna hire because, you're under the weather and you don't feel right about life and shit's all fucked up, man. And you got niggas out on your block who have money. And you just like, man, fuck. So you turn your spot into a trap house. You feel me? And I've seen all that shit. I've seen all that shit. And that's dark side shit. Okay? So I grew up in an era where motherfucking our neighborhood had been in what was in a state of undeclared war on our streets in America. I grew up in gang fucking warfare, man. It was, man, gang crime. That shit was all around us, man. Even when I was a kid doing all those magical, fun, innocent things like Chuck E. Cheese and going to the movies to see Firefox with Clint Eastwood when it came out. And I never in a zillion fucking eons ever thought I was going to be in a gang. I mean, yeah, I was 8 years old, man. And there were motherfuckers in the neighborhood that were like, you know, talking shit like, fucking nigger, you fucking nigger. All right, got to go and get a 9mm from the homie because his dad's got one, or he found one, or he's selling one, or whatever the fuck the case may be. Yeah, I started packing guns, man, in a backpack when I was a kid, and my grandfather had been in war, as were my grandmother and her sisters, my great aunts, and my mother and father were in the military. So I grew up in a military household, and we had guns in the gun cabinet. But now, man, back then, it was then time to have the sidearm, not the rifle, or, you know, the old, you know, like World War II weapons and shit. It was time to come to terms with the fact that it was time to step it up with the modern era of technology and to come equipped with the new weaponry. And so I bought the strap when I was like young, but nonetheless, you know, I never thought to myself, man, I ran with some stoners and shit. And we used to steal some cartons of cigarettes and shit and then go and smoke behind a fucking, you know, building or whatever, man. And, you know, but I never thought that I was going to be in a street gang, right? In a zillion fucking eons. And that's why we formed a fraternity, because we didn't want to do it, but we had to do it. Because, man, if you were in the vacuum that we were in, right, where you knew law enforcement was, you know, being a smart kid and whiz kid, you already knew that what the government was saying, man, as frantic as the government was about the whole thing, and just the way that the information came through to you at the time, you knew, man, that they were going to be understaffed and under-resourced, and that they didn't have the money, man, to combat the shit in the way that ideally would be done in an ideal utopian world. So you're just like, fuck. And then it was on, man. The gang, the police gang drug crack wars, man. The police, however you want to move that around and transpose that, the drug gang police crack wars, the war crack gangs police, whatever drugs, that civil war in America that was undeclared as a civil war, that was the 1980s going into the 1990s. Before they came out with the Orwellian surveillance technology, and before they locked niggas up on the kilogram charges of the drug trafficking with the cartels and shit, and gave them like Ice-T talks about, hundreds of years in prison. They used to be able to give people hundreds of years in prison. There was like no limit. They're like, you now have 10,000 years in prison. When they were doing that kind of shit, man, with the Iran-Contra affair and Noriega and all that shit that was going on, man, in Central South America, and the fucking, you know, the opium trade routes and shit with Afghanistan, and fucking the movie Traffic, and the triangles, and the devil, and the fucking dragon, and all the different drug transshipment trade routes and shit, right? Like you can read about on CIA World Fact Book, right? The opium and the fucking and the heroin. Some niggas say heron, and whatever you can think of, man. The black, the chocolate tie, the chiba, the fucking this, the that, right? When that shit was going on, man, and they were flooding, and I say they in terms of like the drug cartels and the drug barons and the drug lords, when they were flooding our streets with drugs, and then subsequent to that, got a bunch of niggas locked up for fucking trillions, zillions, billions, bazillions of years, right? They're like, okay, now we filled up the prisons, so that's an industry too, right? You know, and then just from the fucking pure carnage of it all, you know, niggas like fucked up, man, like veterans in an actual war, man, PTSD, you know, having a limp and shit from whatever, you know. Now nigga got a cane, you know what I'm saying? Because he was in the gang wars of the 1980s, 90s, whatever the case may be, man. You look at that, man, in at that time, what was, you know, absolutely by all definition of definition, man, which back then was an undeclared war, civil war in America. They don't call it that in the history books, but there were civic leaders back then who were saying the war on our streets, the gang wars, you know, the drug war, you know, dare, you know, whatever. Some people, they joke about it now and they say drugs are really expensive. DARED.A.R.E. You know, the DARE campaign to keep kids off drugs. Some people are like, DARE, drugs are really expensive. That's not what the acronym stood for. And some people say that it was a failed campaign. They tried to do a little resurgence and whatnot, man, after the fact. But nonetheless, whatever the fuck their real intentions were with the DARE campaign, that was what was taking place during what was called the war on drugs, the so-called war on drugs. And then you had people who worked in law enforcement, you know, and first responders and people in the field of like crop, you know, deforestation or, you know, whatever, man, like, you know, the destruction of crops, like marijuana crops or poppy crops or whatever, right? The people who were supposedly fighting the supposed war on drugs, that's when you started to see a lot of people come out like we were decropping and we were destroying, but it really appears to us that it was all smoke, pun intended, and mirrors and laser beams, because we weren't really stopping the drugs. We made it look like we were on one hand, but there were other groups that were actually making sure that the border stayed porous and because it was all to fill up the prisons, man. And it was all the fun to fucking war overseas that Congress wouldn't sign off on. And, you know, so who was, you know, who did that affect? Who did that impact? Us, the youth, kids at the time. So, man, you can't fucking tell me or my generation that we didn't grow up in a state of war. We grew up in a battlefield, man. It wasn't always like that, but at some point it was. And, man, surreal. I mean, really fucking surreal. If you listen to what I'm talking about, man, and you understand what I'm talking about, and you ain't, you know, a heckler, if you're someone that's really paying attention, man, and you're really like, huh, that's interesting. I never really thought about it like that. They won't tell you in the history books. But at some point, my neighborhood was plagued with gangs, drugs, fucking, you know, shootings, crime, like, you know, and it was a state of, it was chaotic. It was chaotic back then. Then they rolled out all the Orwell systems, 1984. They revamped America. They rebuilt it. They remade it. And now you're living in a new future. You're living in a new timeline. Back then, man, shit had fallen in different neighborhoods and communities. And sadly, man, some communities still haven't rebuilt 100%. You know, we're getting Detroit back online now. You know, Detroit was burned out. And, you know, parts of, you know, Ohio, Cleveland, and what was going on in Missouri with like Nellyville, you know, Nelly, I'm talking about the rapper, and, you know, Memphis and different, you know, Washington, D.C., and, you know, different parts of New York, you know. It's like, man, that shit was surreal. And I know I've said that a bunch of times. There really is no other way to describe it. It was what it was, and it was a war, and it was surreal.